Hello, boys and girls. Welcome back to class. Today is going to be a little bit of a departure, a little bit of a different video than what we've been doing. We're not going to be outlining historical events. We're not even going to be talking about different composers and their lives as we have been. As I mentioned last time, we were going to do a little bit of a pullback on opera. And really the point of this video, more than anything, is to introduce some terminology, some of which you may be familiar with, but most of which you're probably not familiar with. And this is specific terminology related to opera, so it's kind of like, I guess every field is like this. They have their own jargon, their own little language that applies only to a particular field. And opera is no different. Opera has that as well. And so we're going to start talking about just the Baroque and the classical era, although I will say that this terminology will apply to operas throughout history. These kind of these innovations that were made in the early days of opera, these will remain in place throughout the ages. So we'll be able to see as we go through history how these different conventions of opera, these different terms, stayed, or how they changed over time, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Okay. Yeah. So we're going to look. Some of the things you'll be listening to today are from the Baroque period. Some are from the classical period. Probably most of them are going to be from the classical period because we kind of just wrapped up Baroque last time, and now we'll be heading into the classical. But we're going to take a look at a little bit of a academic look at opera today before we move on. Well, let's get going. What do you say, huh? So here is the different terminology that you need to know. I don't think I left anything off this list, but if I did, we'll address it as we need to. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the aria. The aria is really the central piece of opera. It's the parts of the opera that everyone remembers the most. And why? Well, because these are the songs. An aria is simply just a song that's in an opera. Okay? Generally speaking, this is a solo song. So it's one person singing, and that's what makes it an aria. These are the central piece. These are the big showstoppers. These are the important parts of the opera. Not to say other parts aren't important, but these are the parts that most people will remember, and these are the parts that people are going to be humming and singing as they walk out the doors. Okay. The next part up is also very important. It's called the recitative. Try to say that 5 times fast. Recitative. So anyway, what's important about opera, we probably should have mentioned this, although I think we did briefly last time, and you may know this already, that what makes opera very unique is that everything in an opera is sung. It's a story, it's being told, it's like a play, except everything is sung. There is no spoken dialogue, okay? There are some things in the classical world. I mean, some of you are very into Broadway shows, and you'll see that these are not considered to be operas because they're, well, for several different reasons, but one of the main reasons is that there are big songs, right? But there's dialogue in between that's spoken. In an opera, it's not like that. Everything is sung. However, everything can't be a song, right? You can't just have one 3-hour song. So what do we have to connect these arias together, these songs together? We have this thing called recitative. This is kind of, I describe this as sing talking. Okay, it's when there's music, but there's no real melodic structure to the person singing. The singer is basically talking at pitch. Okay, so if I could give you I will give you an example on the next slide here, but it would be like if I was talking like this, I'm not really talking and I'm not really singing either. There's this thing in between and it's called recitative. See how that goes? I didn't really sing a melody, but I wasn't exactly talking either. I was talking at pitch. So that's how you can remember recitative. Sometimes it's called recit for short. If you get into the opera world, you'll hear someone saying, "Oh, did you hear that person? They flubbed that line in the recit." Yeah. Let's see what's next. Arioso. Arioso. Arioso is basically it's recit for the singer, but the instrumentalists are playing melodic accompaniment. So it's recit that has melodic accompaniment. I think, most of the time when you have recitative, the accompaniment is very basic. It's just kind of like the basic block chords. There's nothing very exciting or interesting going on in the instruments. But in Arioso, there is the instrumental parts are much more interesting, even though the singer is basically just doing recitative. Normally in a recitative, the accompaniment, if in the Baroque period and classical period, the recitative, the accompaniment is going to be basically harpsichord, and then when you get into Arioso, you're going to have different instruments, mostly strings and things like that. Harpsichord may be a part of it, but it's going to be doing something a lot more interesting than it would be doing in just a plain recitative. Okay, and I'll say here too that the harpsichord is basically used during the Baroque and classical periods, and then very rarely after that. So in the Romantic and modern periods, we don't really use harpsichord for the accompaniment for our recit. Chorus, this is where you guys probably will have heard of this before. A chorus is a group of singers singing together at the same time. It's what we can call a group like that. Some of you are probably even in the TMS 7th grade chorus. Shout out to Miss Gervin if you are, right? Respect. But we can call a group like that a chorus, but it's in the world of opera. It's also the name of a piece that uses a group like that. So I could have a piece. I could say I need a chorus here in this section, and what I mean is I need a lot of people singing all together at once. By the way, I should have mentioned this earlier, but all of these terms can be used for operas, but they could also be used for oratorios, which if you remember last time, we learned that oratorios are unstaged, right? There's no one moving around. There's no acting all around the stage. It's people standing in one spot. And they're often religious in nature. Okay, they're normally using Bible stories and things like that. Okay, but these terms apply to both operas and oratorios. Okay, next we have the duet, and you probably all know that a duet is when you have two singers singing together. And in operas and oratorios, I didn't put these here, but you could also have trios, which are 3 people singing together. You could have quartets, which are 4 people singing together. You could have quintets, which are 5 people singing together. You can basically have any. Normally, once you get more than 5 or so, you might as well just call it a chorus, right? Like such a thing as called a nonet or tentet, right? But once you're getting into 9 and 10, you might as well just call it a chorus, right? I think anyway. That's my opinion. So, but yeah, but you can have duets and things like that in operas. The next term is opera buffa. Okay, this starts to come into place in the classical period, in the early classical period. Opera buffas are comedic operas, funny operas, okay? You did not have these before the classical period, okay? And then we also have opera seria, which is serious or dramatic operas, okay? Now, the term opera seria didn't exist before the classical period either. That's because before the classical period, all operas were of a serious nature. They were all dramatic, right? So there was no need to differentiate between opera seria and opera buffa because they were all serious operas. Now, after the classical period starts, we start to get some comedic operas, so people do feel a need to differentiate between the two, okay? And that's where we get the terms. Now, buffa, what word does this remind you of? It might remind you of the word buffoon, and that is exactly what it is supposed to remind you of, right? So it's a buffoonish opera, right? And normally, especially in the early days of opera buffa, there would be a buffa character, which was normally a bass, right? A man with a very low voice. And he is normally portrayed as kind of like a bumbling idiot. And he is kind of like the butt of a lot of jokes in the opera. But what also is very interesting about this buffa character is that he normally is given one big aria all to himself, which is normally very virtuosic. In other words, it's very, very difficult to sing, and you need to be a really talented and skilled singer to be able to perform these buffa arias. Okay, so just keep that in mind as well. An interesting note about them, because I'm not sure if we'll come back to this, come back to the history of these opera buffas, is that opera buffas started actually as what are known as intermezzos. Okay, so maybe that's another term I should have put there. And intermezzos, as you may be able to tell from the name, are they were little things that would happen in the middle of an opera. So you might have an opera or sometimes even a play or something on stage, and then as almost like an intermission, it's just something to give you a little break from the opera or the play that was on stage. They would have these intermezzos, and sometimes these intermezzos were dance numbers where you would get like some ballerinas in there to do a little dance, and it was completely unrelated to the opera that you were watching. And sometimes what started to happen in the classical period is that you would get these little short operas called opera buffas in the middle and during the intermissions of these longer opera serias. And it would serve to be like a little comic relief because these serious operas were so serious, right? And they would be hours long, and then you could be like, oh my goodness, I don't know if I can take this anymore, right? Well, they would give you a little lighthearted opera buffa here, and these were normally about 30-minute long short operas that were comedic in nature. Okay. Another thing that many opera buffas have in common is that they tend to glamorize the servant class, the working class, and at the expense of the upper class and the elites, which is very interesting because basically the only people who could afford to go to operas were the elites. So these were a little, I don't know, maybe you could say subversive in a sense, that because they would kind of attack the people who were who were watching these operas. But if you had a sense of humor, you could appreciate that. So in almost all of these operas, it's the working class people who are the heroes and the protagonists, and the rich people, the upper class people, the nobility class. These are always the uh, the bad guys, and more, or if not the bad guys, just like um, kind of moronic, you know. So the Buffa character in these is almost always the rich, count or whatever. Okay, so that's what you need to know about opera buffa. Okay, and opera seria doesn't have all these conventions. It's just like basically a continuation, but yet still an evolution of the operas that we had in the Baroque period. Okay, like L'Orfeo and the other ones that we've mentioned. Okay, so let's go over some of these examples. So I have for you an example of each of these that I'm going to attach for you to listen to. For an example of aria, I am going to show you an aria called Non più andrai from an opera called Le Nozze di Figaro, or The Marriage of Figaro, by Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. Okay, I chose this one. This is one of my favorite arias. It's one I've actually sung many times, and I give it to you because I think there's a lot of misconceptions when it comes to opera. Most of the time when we were in school, I would normally have you write down your own personal definition of opera, or what are some characteristics that you think describe opera. And I can't tell you, almost everyone says, as one of their descriptors of opera, almost everyone says high pitched. I can't tell you how much that bothers me. High pitched. What? Okay, so I think a lot of people think opera is just like some woman like screeching, in a long dress and in a helmet with horns on it or something. And this is a grotesque caricature of opera. We don't want to think of opera that way. So here is Non più andrai, which has a baritone singer, a male singer, and so this will show you that opera is not high pitched. Okay. For recitative, I'm going to give to you as an example a recit called Non mi dir from Mozart's Don Giovanni. And recits are normally, I mentioned before, they're connective. They connect different parts of the opera, and they almost always come before a big aria or a chorus or a duet or something like that. And this comes before the very famous duet known as La ci darem la mano. Okay, so what I'm gonna post that, and that's the example for duet that I gave you. So so for this example, you're going to listen to the whole thing. You're going to listen to the recit, which is called Non mi dir, and then you'll listen to how it leads into the duet called La ci darem la mano from Don Giovanni. Okay. All right. Next up for arioso, I'm gonna give you one very famous example. It's probably the best example of arioso that I can think of, and it's from not an opera but an oratorio, Handel's Messiah, which this is where the Alleluia chorus comes from, right? So the arioso is called "There Were Shepherds Abiding in the Field." And what I want you to listen for here is notice that the singer is doing recit, okay? But then at some point, the instrumentation gets more melodic while the singer remains doing her recitative. So it will go, there were shepherds abiding in the field, watching over their flock by night. And then you'll hear, and then it takes on from there. And then that will eventually stop, and it will go back to just plain recit again, and then it will go back into arioso. And there is a chorus that comes after that, but you don't have to listen to that chorus, okay? You can if you want to. Next up for chorus is, we're gonna, actually I pressed the fast forward button, and we're going, for this one I took you into the Romantic era for this chorus, okay? This is the very famous chorus called Libbiamo nei lieti calici, from one of my favorite operas, maybe even my number one. This is from La Traviata by Giuseppe Verdi. Now, this is the chorus that kicks off the opera. So this is it's very, very famous. I'm sure, I would be surprised actually if someone hadn't heard it before. Okay, it's quite well known. I already told you about La Ci darem la mano. That's what you're going to listen for the duet. Now for opera buffa and opera seria, I don't expect you to listen to the entire operas, but as I said, you can if you like, right? Quarantined at the opera, we could do it. We could make it a thing. We can make it go viral. Considered by many to be one of the original opera buffas, we have La Serva Padrona by Giovanni Piergolesi. So check that one out. And then actually might just give you one aria from there. I think that's what I'm going to do. So you won't, I mean, if you want to look it up, La Serva Padrona, you can find the whole opera on YouTube, I'm sure. But I'm just going to give you one aria from there. I'll probably give you the buffa aria from there. And then for opera seria, we're sticking in the Baroque period here. This is another one of my favorites by the English composer Henry Purcell. This is Dido and Aeneas. And I'm probably going to give you Dido's Lament. Beautiful, and maybe the recit before it too. Beautiful, beautiful Baroque aria here, okay, from Dido and Aeneas. All right, if there's any questions, please let me know. That's going to be it for us today. I hope you learned a lot about the terminology and the definitions for opera, because these are basically, even though we're in the Baroque and the classical here, these are basically going to stay the same for the rest of known history, okay? Maybe they'll get rid of them sometime in the future, but they're still using them now, all right? So we'll be able to track how they change over time. And that's going to be it for me. I hope you have a great day. I hope we're supposed to get a lot of nice weather this week. I hope you find some time to get outside. And maybe you want to show some of this stuff to your parents too. That could be a fun activity to do together. Get a little bit of high culture, a little high society in your living room. Why not? Okay, goodbye everyone.